which we today would call Jordan, for some reason, eludes his grasp. Most scholars speculate that it's to give the remnant a place to flee to. But that's conjecture. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape, and he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans, and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Now, that's kind of interesting, especially if you've been following world events and you understand the Shanghai Pact, where China and Russia have joined forces against the United States by treaty, joined by most of the players in Central Asia. And when NATO had redefined itself as a global police force in 1999, that chilled not only our enemies but also our allies. But China and Russia and most of Central Asia signed the Shanghai Pact. And it's interesting that the threat he sees here comes out of the east and out of the north. It shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. Yet, and it's interesting, most scholars recognize that must mean between the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean. And some scholars speculate that may somehow involve the temple that's described in the last few chapters of Ezekiel, because that temple is not in Jerusalem. And so there are speculations about that deserve some study. He shall plant his tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Well, let's shift now, and let's take a look at the book of Revelation. Chapter 13, of course, is the main passage of the Antichrist in the book of Revelation. The first two verses, John says, I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And upon his horns 10 crowns. And upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet was as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, his seat, and his great authority. Who's the dragon? From the previous chapter, chapter 12, verse 9, it's identified, of course, as none other than Satan. But there's something else that's noteworthy here. You notice that there's a leopard, a bear, and a lion. That echoes in our ears because we remember those are the principal idioms used in Daniel chapter 7. The lion was Babylon, the bear was Persia, and the leopard was Greece. But you notice they're in the backward order here. See, when Daniel was given the vision, it was yet future. John is looking backward in time, so they're inverted. Interesting. But somehow, this final empire bears marks of all its 3 precedents. And worthy of note. Satan has 7 super kingdoms. In Revelation 12, verse 3, it says, there appeared another wonder in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns. There it is again. And 7 crowns upon his heads. Where on earth do we get 7 empires? Well, you see, we're familiar with Daniel's 4+1. But Daniel wrote in the days of Babylon. Prior to him, there were 2 major empires, Egypt and Assyria. And so if you take the 2 precedent, if you start from the beginning, there's Egypt, Assyria, then Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome in 2 phases. And so, and of course, the second phase of the Roman Empire having the 10 horns is well detailed in Daniel 2, 7, and 8, and we've looked at those passages. Now, don't let these last 5 confuse you, because again, it's Daniel's 4+1, if you will, Rome in 2 phases. Once you understand that, then everything starts to make some sense here. And most scholars recognize that the Roman Empire is, as I say, in 2 phases, what I'll call phase 1 and phase 2. Well, when you get to Revelation 17, it says, and there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. Now, this is pretty straightforward. 5 are fallen. This is being penned by John, and behind him are 5 empires, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and Greece. That makes sense. There are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, and 1 is. The one that's around right then, namely Rome. Paul was in exile on the Isle of Patmos when he was penning this from Rome. And the other is not yet come. Okay, that's the seventh. That's the last one. It's the phase 2 of Rome, if you will. It's the last one, sort of. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. Okay. The next verse, Revelation 17:11, and the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. What on earth can that mean? Taken by itself, it sounds like it's contradictory. The beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. That passage has puzzled scholars for centuries. But in this background, let's take a look at this. The beast that was and is not, even he's the 8th. Well, that's the 11th horn of the final empire. He's the 8th, what I'll call the 11th horn. And he's of the 7. That means then he's somehow of the 7. But there's another clue here. It says that was and is not. Which of those 7 has disappeared from history? One of the great mysteries of archaeology is that there were many, many experts that didn't believe the story of Jonah because they didn't believe there ever existed a city called Nineveh. And it may astonish you to discover that they didn't know anything about it in an archaeological sense until the gold rush in California. Not that it had anything to do with it, I just mentioned that so you remember the date. In 1849, Layard was the committed person that made history by discovering Nineveh. Alexander the Great, Napoleon, many world conquerors walked over it not even knowing it was there because it was buried. And Layard, in 1849, discovered Nineveh. And today it's well known. Of course, his discovery ushered in a craze in archaeology in that whole region. But one of the mysteries about the Assyrian Empire is how it not only rose to power tremendously, but it disappears so quickly without a trace. Without a trace. And so it's interesting that there are vestiges of all the rest of these out here. Egypt's still around. Babylon in various forms has had different lives, if you will. Persia, Greece, Rome, of course, all visible. And so the speculation is that the beast that was and is not, even he's the 8th, but he is of the 7 and goeth into perdition. Now, you say, gee, what on earth is this leading to? Well, let's take another look at a couple of other verses in the Scripture. Micah chapter 5 has something to say about this. It says, in this man shall be the peace. I think he's speaking of the Messiah, but then he goes, when the Assyrian shall come into our land, and when he shall tread in our palaces, then shall we rise against him 7 shepherds and 8 principal men. And they shall waste the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod in the entrances thereof. Thus shall he deliver us from the Assyrian when he cometh into our land, and when he treadeth within our borders. The Assyrian, the Assyria, the land of Nimrod. Do you pick up that? What on earth is Micah talking about? And that's what we're going to explore a little further. But I want you to notice something. In recent years, in 1906, Iran became an independent republic. From the old Roman Empire, these previously subsumed entities have reemerged. 1921, Afghanistan, 22, Egypt, 22, Iraq, 24, Turkey, 1930, Lebanon, 1938, Syria, 46, Jordan, 47, Pakistan, both Jordan and Pakistan being synthetic countries built to appease the Muslims, and 48, this nation Israel. It's interesting that in our recent history, all the pieces have resurfaced, perhaps to be recoalesced in this final super empire. Egypt, of course, was Ptolemy. Seleucus were the rest of these. Seleucus and Lysimachus if you talk Turkey. But out of these, Iraq and Syria are those regions, those are the names by which they're known today, that way back constituted the empire known as Assyria, which incidentally was the place from which the first world dictator sprung. The first dictator, Nimrod, and perhaps the last will be an echo of that. And we'll take a look at that in our next session. Nimrod II, the 11th king.